I am now joined by Tony Gosling, historian and investigative journalist from Bristol. Tony, what do you think about these latest interactions and the latest comments by the IRGC in this statement?
Well, look, never mind calling on all nations. He needs to be calling on all nations, and Christian and Jews around the world, because actually the fact of the matter is this is common cause between us, as well as anybody. It doesn't matter what religion or faith. This is a genocide, and it's particularly becoming obvious that the words spoken even by people like President Macron, which have been quite encouraging for the Palestinians, they don't really seem to ever lead to action. So it was interesting. One of the articles by a former Guardian journalist, it's a shame he's not still at the Guardian, Jonathan Cook, explains that in conversations, confidential conversations with the ambassadors from the West to Israel, it's quite clear when asked that there are no red lines. They have to scratch their head. Well, there is no really any red lines at all between many of these Western countries, particularly Britain and the United States, and Israel. So it seems they can get away with almost anything. And today we've heard from the Haaretz newspaper in Israel that one of the soldiers has admitted, was told the newspaper, that even children, women and disabled and the elderly will be killed in northern Gaza. Now this again, of course, is a massive war crime. Okay, so these non-combatants, why not just, if you want to detain them, no, the Israeli Defense Force is killing them. This is most definitely ethnic cleansing going on, and it's admitted from the mouths of the IDF themselves in the Israel's own press. So the Israeli people can read this and the world can read it and understands exactly what's going on.
Thank you. Tony, earlier we've had the news that German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, these are his words, saying to the reporters that there will always be deliveries, that of arms, he meant. And at the same time, we have got report from Politico that a Biden official has said that White House would not consider suspending arms transfers to Israel, even if it was blocking humanitarian aid in Gaza. How can we justify that? What do you think? What's your take? How long is this support going on?
Well, I'm afraid, it is really a conspiracy. There is a small group of people, actually the vast majority of those around the world, want to see an end to this genocide. There's a tiny number of people that are trying very hard to make sure it carries on, and there are all sorts of motives for that, and I think it's important to understand those. The main motive, as far as I see it, is to create this fake religious war in the Middle East, to discredit these Abrahamic faiths, particularly Islam and Judaism. So we've got a fake version of Judaism fighting. But there is a tiny number, you could almost call it a cult, of people in the West, mainly from the United States and UK here, that are fueling this. And of course, they're coming out with lots of empty words. One of the most important factors is how much the British and American populations and the European and the English-speaking populations around the world know about what's actually going on. And I noticed just now you're playing the footage of the burning hospital, where Shaban Ahmed, or he's also called Shaban al-Datur, he was incinerated yesterday. Somebody who'd been on TikTok, YouTube, and various other channels and social media, explaining and documenting for the world what's going on in northern Gaza. And there he is with his hand raised up. Now, this is on all the TV channels here, but we are also at the same time suffering an assault on journalism here in Britain. The BBC has got massive cuts to its journalists. Just announced yesterday they're trying to cut down the amount that the British public see, as well as Sky News, who's done some of the best reporting, the most fearless reporting from Gaza itself, for example, of Israeli war crimes, documenting them. They are now being threatened with possibly losing their franchise, so Sky News may go off the air. We may not see any more of that. So as you can see, this is not just a fight and battle going on the ground. It's also a battle on our TV screens, which is being waged, a psychological warfare, and it shows that the West is running out of options, that Israel and its evil friends in Britain and America are running out of options. Even in the Second World War, we had propaganda broadcasts from Nazi Germany, from Radio Luxembourg in Britain on medium wave, and the British government decided not to get rid of them, not to block them, because by blocking them, they would appear to be feeling on the back foot, and they just allowed it, and then they just lampooned what the Germans were doing. But now the British are absolutely on the opposite side of history. We are on the dark side, the bad side of history, by trying to shut people's eyes. It's almost like having red hot pokers stuck into your eyes. You're not allowed to see this anymore. You're not allowed to see these war crimes, and you're not allowed to see this genocide because we stand with Israel. Well, that's what the elite think, but the British people don't think that at all.
Tony, on another note, we have been seeing different stances by Emmanuel Macron and France in particular, saying that, for example, today we had the news that they banned Israeli firms from attending this naval arms exhibition in France. Is France really playing a different tune right now? How do you see that? Do we see a divide? Are we witnessing a divide on the world stage?
Well, a little bit maybe, but you see, if the Israelis are not at this arms fair, what will happen is there's less likely to be protests at the arms fair. Those deals can be done behind closed doors. I think much of the rhetoric that we're seeing from other European powers, maybe a little bit less the Spanish, but particularly from the French and Germans, as well as obviously the British, you see occasional moves in the direction of criticism of Israel, but they're never followed up by action. There was just a little bit here in Britain where some of the arms licenses were paused, but really the idea is to go on the TV, say, oh, isn't it a shame, isn't it a pity what's happening, but actually when it comes to action you're getting very little from this part of the world, and most of course of the help for those of Gaza has been going on in terms of words at the UN Security Council and at the General Assembly, 2/3 of which demanded a ceasefire and explained that the Israelis are ethnic cleansing, they are racist. So that's the United Nations talking. But in terms of action, really it's only the Lebanese in the form of Hezbollah and the Yemenis, and now of course Iran too, who are taking action. Now, I mean, it would be much nicer, wouldn't it, to see the Western powers act to restrain Israel, which they're really not doing, rather than to have to use force in the Middle East itself. Because I think for many, many decades, the United States particularly has been cooking up with Israel this battle in the Middle East they want between this fake version of Judaism called Zionism and the genuine Islamic countries, and absolutely everybody, I think, around the world, independent people anyway, who are not part of the conspiracy here, support the Palestinians wholeheartedly. But the question is, what can we do? We can give donations and things like that, but it's very difficult to know. You know, collective punishment is what's happening up in, particularly in northern Gaza right now. This is a Nazi tactic. In fact, the kill ratios is another Nazi tactic. So what the Nazis always tried to do in the Second World War was to make sure they killed 10 of the opposition, whether it's partisans or whoever it was, for every one Nazi that was killed. And of course, we're seeing a massively, even over that sort of ratio, the number of Palestinians, the number of Lebanese being killed compared to the number of Israelis, and they believe that they can keep this up. And amazingly, the audacious, they say, well, I call them war criminals, Israelis, are painting themselves as the victim. So this is an epic, it's almost a biblical proportions, this. In fact, some friends and I were looking at the name of Bibi Netanyahu to see if it added up to the number 666, the number of the Antichrist, because of course many people have been saying that he is painting himself as a Messiah figure. He wants to come to Iran to save the Iranian people. He wants to come to Lebanon to save the Lebanese people from Hezbollah. So he is painting himself as a Messiah figure, which is rather worrying when you consider that he could actually be a kind of Antichrist figure, a kind of evil Messiah that is prophesied in the book of Revelation.
And one final question. What do you think are going to be the consequences within Israel for Netanyahu's policies? Do you think he's becoming even more popular because of the war? Or do you think he's going to pay the price for it later on?
Well, look, so much of this seems to hinge on his own personality, which is very worrying, isn't it? Netanyahu wants to stay out of jail. I think what happens is sometimes when people make mistakes, rather than admit their mistakes, they double down. They say, no, I didn't make a mistake, and they continue with that mistake. And in fact, that's why they say double down. They actually increase it and they amplify it. That's what Netanyahu's been doing. And the problem is, he is right now the leader of a nuclear-armed doomsday cult that could set not just the Middle East on fire, but the world on fire. That's, I think, one of the biggest worries. I'm sure the Chinese and the Russians particularly are looking at this situation, hoping to goodness that Netanyahu is put behind bars, taken out of his job, and that these extremists are gotten rid of, so that this situation can be diffused. But it's difficult to see that because this man's own personal ego is getting in the way of the state of Israel and its own future.
Thank you, Tony. That was Tony Gosling, historian and investigative journalist, who was with us from Bristol.